Nothing could cut through that trunk. When they discovered what was inside, Marcus Bennett was on his third day trying to cut down the century-old tree, but nothing worked. Every chainsaw blade that touched the trunk snapped as if made of paper, leaving him increasingly desperate and unable to understand what was happening. The problem was urgent and couldn't wait. The buyer interested in the land had made it clear that if the tree wasn't removed by the end of the week, he would walk away from the deal. Marcus needed that money to pay for his mother's treatment. Mrs. Dorothy had been in the private hospital since last month with heart problems. "Marcus, for God's sake, stop being so stubborn and call the tree removal company," pleaded Sarah, his wife, as she watched her husband change yet another broken blade on the chainsaw borrowed from the neighbor. "We don't have money for that. You know that very well," he replied without taking his eyes off the equipment. "Besides, it's not possible that I can't cut down a tree. I've worked with wood for 20 years. Sarah sighed, knowing her husband's tone of voice all too well. When Marcus got something into his head, there was no force in the world that could make him change his mind. She looked at the immense tree that dominated the center of the land, inherited from his late grandpa William, its thick roots spreading for meters in every direction. "James said his chainsaw is new. Maybe it'll work better," she commented, trying to find a solution. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, and he had already lost count of how many liters of water he'd drunk since dawn. His clothes were soaked, and the muscles in his arms ached from the effort. "I've already tried with 3 different chainsaws, Mr. Howard's, Cousin David's, and now Joe's. All the blades broke in the same spot," he said, pointing to a dark stain on the trunk, about a meter off the ground. Sarah moved closer to examine it better. There really was something strange about that specific area. The bark looked different, darker, and with a texture that didn't match the rest of the tree. She ran her hand over the surface and felt that it was smoother, almost as if it were made of a different material. "Marcus, look at this," she called, pressing the area with her fingers. "It seems like there's something under the bark." He approached, intrigued. During the 3 days of intense work, he had been so focused on cutting that he had never stopped to examine that stain up close. Now, looking more carefully, he could see that there really was something irregular there. "It's just older bark," he said, turning back to the chainsaw. "Old trees always have these differences in the trunk." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She had grown up in the countryside, surrounded by crops and trees of all kinds, and had never seen anything like it. That dark stain looked almost circular, as if someone had made a hole and then covered it with something. The roar of the chainsaw echoed across the land again, followed by the familiar metallic sound of the blade snapping. Marcus cursed under his breath and threw the tool to the ground with such force that it bounced twice before stopping. "That's the 4th blade today," he murmured, running his hands through his dark hair that was starting to grey at the temples. Sarah stepped away from the tree and went to her husband. At 42, Marcus still had the same determination that had won her over in their youth, but she could see the exhaustion taking over his brown eyes. He had been sleeping poorly for weeks, worried about the mounting debts and his mother's health. "Let's have lunch, and then you can try again," she suggested, lightly touching his arm. "Maybe you'll have better luck this afternoon." Marcus shook his head. The day was passing quickly, and he knew each lost hour meant fewer chances to finish the work on time. The buyer had scheduled a new visit for Thursday, and today was already Tuesday. "I can't stop now," he said, heading to the corner of the lot where he kept the tools. "I'll try with the axe. It takes longer, but at least it won't break." Sarah watched him pick up the heavy axe that had belonged to Grandpa William. The tool was over 50 years old and still in perfect condition, with its well-cared-for wooden handle and sharp blade. Marcus had always admired the quality of old objects, which lasted decades when well made. He positioned himself in front of the tree and struck the first blow. The axe bounced back with such force it almost slipped from his hands, producing a strange metallic sound, as if it had struck iron. "What the hell?" he murmured, examining the axe blade for damage. The blow had left only a small scratch on the bark, right in the middle of the dark stain Sarah had noticed. Marcus struck again, this time with more force, and again the axe bounced back. The noise was even louder, echoing through the empty lot as if it came from inside the tree itself. Sarah ran over, alarmed by the sound. "What was that?" "I don't know," replied Marcus, clearly bewildered. "It's as if there's something metal inside the tree." They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. The same question crossed both their minds. How could there be metal inside a living tree? Marcus decided to try a different angle. He moved a few steps to the right and struck another blow, this time aiming at an area where the bark seemed normal. The axe easily penetrated the wood, chipping off a considerable piece. He repeated the motion several times, creating a deep notch in the trunk. "See? This part works normally," he said to Sarah, who was watching intently. Encouraged by the success, Marcus continued working in that area. Within half an hour, he had created a cut that went from one side of the trunk to the other, passing a few inches below the mysterious dark stain. He stopped to rest and wiped the sweat dripping into his eyes. "If I can cut underneath that thing, maybe the tree will still fall," he thought aloud. Sarah didn't answer. She was focused on observing the dark stain, which now, with the cut just below, looked even stranger. There was something there that didn't fit with the rest of the tree, something her instinct told her was important. Marcus returned to work with renewed enthusiasm. If he couldn't cut through the strange area, he would cut around it. It was more time-consuming work, but at least he was making progress. With each blow of the axe, pieces of wood flew through the air, and the cut grew deeper. It was when he was almost completely through the trunk that something unexpected happened. The last axe blow hit a softer part of the wood, and the tool sank in deeply, making a muffled sound different from all the previous ones. Marcus tried to pull the axe out, but it was firmly stuck. The more force he applied, the more the tool seemed to bury itself. That's when he noticed something strange. Around the axe blade, the wood was crumbling in an odd way, as if it were hollow inside. "Sarah, come here," he called, his voice full of surprise. She approached and immediately saw what had caught her husband's attention. The wood around the axe was coming loose in large pieces, revealing an empty space inside the trunk. This was not a normal tree. It was hollow. Marcus managed to free the axe and began removing loose pieces of wood with his hands. With each piece he removed, the hole grew larger, revealing that the inside of the tree was very different from what they expected. "Marcus," said Sarah, her voice low and hesitant, "there's something in there." He stopped what he was doing and peered through the opening he had created. Inside, in the dark interior of the hollow trunk, he could see the silhouette of objects that clearly did not belong there. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Marcus ran to the shed behind the house to get a flashlight. His hands trembled with excitement and nervousness as he searched among the tools. Sarah stood still beside the tree, watching the dark opening, as if expecting something to come out. When he returned with the flashlight, he turned it on and directed the beam of light into the trunk. What they saw left them speechless. There was a true cavity inside, as if someone had hollowed out the tree and turned it into a secret hiding place. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," murmured Sarah, leaning in to get a better look. Marcus directed the light to different corners of the cavity. They could clearly see some objects stacked at the back, what looked like a dark wooden box, some packages wrapped in plastic, and something that shone like metal. "How did someone do this?" he asked, more to himself than to his wife. Sarah remembered old conversations with Grandpa William, who died when Marcus was only 15. The old man had always been a mysterious figure in the family, a man of few words who spent hours alone on that property, especially near the large tree. "Your grandfather," she said suddenly. "Remember how he always came here? Even when he was older and had trouble walking, he insisted on coming to this tree." Marcus vaguely remembered. A child at the time, he didn't pay much attention to his grandfather's eccentric habits. But now, looking at that secret cavity, he began to understand that perhaps there was a specific reason for old William's constant visits. "We need to get these things out of there," said Marcus, heading back to the shed. "I'll get a pole to push the objects closer to the opening." While he searched for something suitable, Sarah continued to illuminate the inside of the trunk with the flashlight. There was something fascinating about that discovery, as if they had found buried treasure. She tried to imagine how long those things had been there, protected from rain and time by the tree trunk. Marcus returned with a long, thin pole he used for cleaning gutters. Carefully, he began to push the objects closer to the opening. The first item he managed to reach was one of the packages wrapped in plastic. "Got it," he said, pulling the package out. The plastic was yellowed with age, but still protected the contents well. Through the transparent material, they could see there were papers inside, many papers carefully folded. Sarah took the package and examined it carefully. There was no identification on the outside, no clue as to what it could be. She looked at Marcus, who nodded, giving permission to open it. Carefully, Sarah undid the knot that sealed the plastic and removed the papers from inside. They were letters, dozens of handwritten letters on paper yellowed with time. She took the first one and began to read, her expression changing as she processed the words. "Marcus," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "these letters are from your grandfather." He dropped the pole and moved closer to his wife. "What do you mean?" Sarah showed him the letter she was reading. "Look here. To my dear grandson, Marcus. It's signed, Grandpa William." Marcus took the letter with trembling hands and read the first lines. It was indeed his grandfather's handwriting, an old and meticulous penmanship he remembered seeing on rare occasions as a child. "My dear Marcus, if you are reading this, it means you have finally found my special hiding place. This tree has always been very important to our family, and now it holds secrets I never had the courage to tell while I was alive." Marcus stopped reading and looked at Sarah, who had tears in her eyes. "There are more letters here," she said, flipping through the stack of papers, "all written by him. Some are for you, others for your mother, for your Aunt Christine, for Godfather James." Marcus sat on the ground, still holding the letter. A mix of emotions overwhelmed him: surprise, curiosity, and a strange sense of nostalgia for a man he had barely known as a child. "Why did he never deliver these letters?" he asked. Sarah continued examining the papers. There were letters dated decades ago, some from when Marcus was just a baby. Others were more recent, written just a few years before his grandfather's death. "Look at this one," she said, showing a letter addressed, "To Dorothy, my dear daughter-in-law. It's for your mother." Marcus stood up quickly. His mother had never spoken much about her relationship with her father-in-law, but he had always had the impression they were not very close. Perhaps this letter could clarify some old family questions. "We have to show this to my mother," he said, "but first let's see what else is in there." They returned to the tree, this time working as a team. Marcus used the pole to push the objects, while Sarah caught them as they came out of the opening. The second item was the wooden box they had seen before. The box was heavy and had old locks on the sides. When they shook it, they could hear the sound of objects moving inside. Marcus recognized the type of wood. It was jatoba, the same wood his grandfather used in his carpentry projects. "This box was made by him," said Marcus, running his hand over the smooth surface. "I recognize the work. Grandpa was always very careful with details." The third and final object was what had glinted under the flashlight's beam. It was a small metal tin, the kind used to store cookies or sweets, but very old and with signs of rust on the edges. With the three items spread on the ground before them, Marcus and Sarah looked at each other. The discovery had completely transformed the nature of the day. What began as a frustrated attempt to cut down a tree had become a journey of family discoveries. "What do we do now?" asked Sarah. Marcus looked at the tree, then at the objects, and finally at his wife. A decision was forming in his mind, a decision that would change the entire course of events. "First, let's see what's in the box and the tin. Then," he paused, looking again at the centuries-old tree, "then we're going to rethink selling this land." Sarah nodded, feeling they were on the verge of discovering something important about the family. Marcus opened the first drawer of the wooden box. Inside, carefully organized, were old photographs, documents, and small objects that seemed to be personal mementos. The photographs showed Grandpa William at different stages of life: a young farm worker, a family man, an established carpenter in the city. There were also photos of Grandma Eleanor, who died when Marcus was too young to remember her. "Look at this," said Sarah, picking up a photograph that showed Grandpa next to the same tree, though much younger and smaller. "This photo must be about 40 years old. Even back then, the tree was sizable, but it had clearly grown a lot since." In the photo, Grandpa William was smiling broadly, with one hand resting on the trunk, as if posing with an old friend. Marcus continued exploring the contents of the box. There were documents related to the purchase of the land, birth certificates of children and grandchildren, and even some drawings made by children, probably by Grandpa William's own children when they were little. "He kept everything," murmured Marcus, clearly moved by the discovery. "Every important family memory is here." The second drawer held more surprises. There was a notebook with notes about plant growth, detailed records about caring for the tree, and even a rudimentary map of the land with specific markings. "Marcus, look at this," said Sarah, pointing to an entry in the notebook. 1987. Marcus turned 2. I planted the rose bushes he likes near the special tree. One day, I will tell him about our secret. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He vaguely remembered the rose bushes which had died a few years later. He never knew his grandfather had planted them specifically because of him. The third drawer revealed the most surprising item of all, an old, ornate key accompanied by a small hand-drawn map. The map clearly showed the land and the tree, but there was an X marked at a specific spot, a few meters away from the trunk. "This can't be what I'm thinking," said Sarah, examining the map. Marcus picked up the key and examined it against the light. It was an ornate key, the kind used in old furniture or trunks. It clearly wasn't for an ordinary door. "There's something else buried here," he said, excitement growing in his voice. "Grandpa didn't keep everything in the tree." They compared the map with the actual land. The X was marked near a group of stones that Marcus had always assumed were natural, but now he realized they were arranged in a very specific way. Before investigating the spot marked on the map, Marcus decided to open the metal tin. Inside they found more letters, these more recent and in better condition. The first letter was addressed, "To whoever finds this treasure." Marcus opened the letter and began to read aloud. "If you are reading this, it means you have managed to discover the secret of our special tree. I am William Bennett, and this property has belonged to our family for 3 generations. The tree is not just a tree. It is the guardian of our history and our future." He paused to process the words, then continued. "When I was young, I made many mistakes. I was too proud to apologize, too stubborn to accept help, and too quiet to express my love for the family. The letters in this collection are all the words I should have said, but never found the courage." Sarah held Marcus's hand as he kept reading. "Each letter is addressed to someone I hurt or to whom I never managed to properly express my feelings. My greatest regret is not having been a better grandfather to my grandchildren. Marcus, if you are reading this, know that I was always very proud of you, even when I didn't know how to show it." Marcus had to stop reading. His grandfather's words touched old wounds he didn't even know he carried. He had always felt distant from the old man, assuming there was no affection between them. Sarah took the letter and continued reading. "The key in the box opens something very special that I saved for times of family need. If you are going through difficulties, use what you find wisely. But remember, the greatest treasure is not what is buried, but the love we share for one another." They looked at each other, both with misty eyes. The discovery was turning out to be much deeper than a simple collection of stored objects. Marcus stood up and walked to the group of stones indicated on the map. Indeed, they were arranged intentionally, forming a sort of circle that perfectly concealed whatever was buried beneath. "Help me move these stones," he asked Sarah. Together, they began removing the stones one by one. Under the third stone, Marcus felt something different as he touched the soil. There was a hard surface a few inches below the earth. They dug with their hands until they revealed a small metal lid buried in the ground. The lid had an old lock that seemed to match perfectly the ornate key they had found in the box. Marcus inserted the key into the lock. It turned easily, as if it had been well cared for over the years. The lid opened, revealing a small compartment dug into the earth and lined with plastic for protection against moisture. Inside the compartment was an old leather pouch, carefully sealed. Marcus removed it with reverence, feeling he was about to discover his grandfather's final secret. The pouch contained something that left them completely astonished. It was money, a lot of money, old but still valid bills, organized in bundles and carefully preserved. "My God," murmured Sarah, "how much do you think is here?" Marcus began counting the bundles, his hands trembling slightly. There was far more money than he could have imagined, enough to pay all his mother's medical debts and still have a considerable amount left. "There's a letter here too," said Sarah, picking up a folded paper from the bottom of the pouch. This letter was different from the others. It was addressed specifically to Marcus, my grandson, and the date showed it had been written just a few weeks before Grandpa William's death. Marcus opened the letter carefully, preparing himself for the final words of the man he now realized had been much wiser and more loving than he ever imagined. "My dear Marcus, if you are reading this letter, it means the time has come for you to know the whole truth about our family and about this special place. This money was saved over many years, kept for times of real family need." The letter continued explaining that Grandpa William had always known that one day the family might face financial difficulties. He had set aside part of each carpentry job, each crop sale, each small profit, for decades. "But the most important thing is not the money, Marcus. The most important things are the letters. Each one contains a lesson I learned too late in life. I made the mistake of keeping my feelings to myself, of not expressing my love and gratitude when I had the chance." Marcus stopped reading and looked at Sarah. "It seems Grandpa knew exactly what was going to happen to us." Sarah nodded, thinking about the situation they were in, exactly the kind of financial hardship Grandpa William had prepared for. The letter continued with specific instructions on how to use the money, and more importantly, how to deliver the letters to the proper recipients. Grandpa William had left detailed instructions about each person mentioned in the letters and why it was important for them to receive the messages. "Marcus, my final request is that you deliver each letter personally. Do not let pride and the fear of expressing feelings do to you what they did to me. Be the man I should have been, brave enough to show love and humble enough to ask for forgiveness when needed." When Marcus finished reading the letter, he and Sarah remained silent for a few minutes, processing everything they had discovered. The day had begun with frustration and despair, but now it was turning into something completely different. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked softly. Marcus looked at the ancient tree, then at the treasures scattered around them, and finally at his wife. A deep understanding was forming in his mind about what truly mattered. "First, let's take this money to the hospital and pay for my mother's treatment," he said with determination. "Then we'll start delivering these letters, and lastly," he looked at the tree again, "we'll cancel the sale of the land." Sarah smiled, feeling her husband was making the right decisions. "And the tree." Marcus approached the ancient trunk and placed his hand on the same spot where his grandfather had placed his in the old photograph. "The tree stays. It's not an obstacle that needs to be removed. It's the heart of our family." They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing the discovery. The letters were carefully sorted by recipient, the money was counted and stored in a safe place, and the personal items were cleaned and organized. Each item revealed a little more of Grandpa William's complex personality. As the sun began to set, Marcus made a decision. He called the interested buyer for the land and cancelled the sale, explaining he had changed his mind about leaving the family property. The buyer tried to argue, offering more money, but Marcus stood firm in his decision. For the first time in weeks, he felt in control of the situation, not pushed by circumstances. The next morning, Marcus and Sarah went directly to the hospital where Mrs. Dorothy was admitted. They brought one of the grandfather's letters addressed to her, along with the money needed to settle all the medical expenses. Mrs. Dorothy, a 73-year-old lady with hair as white as cotton and eyes still lively despite her age, received the visit with joy. She was feeling better after treatment, but still needed some care. "Son, what's that look on your face?" she asked, noticing the different expression on Marcus's face. "Did something happen?" Marcus sat beside his mother's bed and told the whole story of the discovery in the tree. As he narrated the events, He saw Mrs. Dorothy's expression change from surprise to emotion, and finally to a deep understanding. "I always knew your grandfather kept secrets," she said when Marcus finished. "He was a man of few words but great feelings. He just didn't know how to express them." Sarah took the letter addressed to her mother-in-law and handed it to her carefully. "He left this specifically for you, Mrs." Dorothy took the letter with slightly trembling hands. She put on her glasses and began to read silently. As her eyes moved over the words written by her late father-in-law, tears began to stream down her cheeks. "What does it say, Mom?" asked Marcus, concerned by her emotional reaction. She wiped her eyes and began to read a few passages aloud. "Dorothy, my dear daughter-in-law, this letter should have been written many years ago. I want to ask for forgiveness for never treating you as you deserved. When Marcus brought you home for the first time, I immediately saw that he had found a special woman. You were exactly the kind of person our family needed, caring, hard-working, and dedicated." Mrs. Dorothy stopped reading for a moment, clearly moved. "I always thought he didn't like me," she said to Marcus. "He was always so serious and spoke so little." "Keep reading, Mom," encouraged Marcus, "but I was too proud to admit that you were bringing light into our home. It was easier to stay quiet than to acknowledge that my son had made a better choice than I ever imagined possible. You took care of him, you took care of the grandchildren, and you took care of me when I was sick, always with patience and love." Now Marcus's eyes were also brimming with tears. "I never knew Mum had taken care of Grandpa during his final illness. Mrs. Dorothy had never mentioned it." "You took care of him?" he asked. "Of course I did," she replied, as if it were obvious. "He was family. In his last months, when he grew weaker, I went to his house every day to bring food and check on him. I thought you knew." Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look, realizing how many important family stories had gone unnoticed over the years. The lack of communication had created huge gaps in understanding between the generations. Mrs. Dorothy continued reading the letter. "Dorothy, I want you to know that I consider you the daughter I never had. You brought joy to our family and raised wonderful grandchildren who are the pride of our lineage. If you ever need anything, remember you have always been and will always be part of the Bennett family." The letter ended with specific instructions about some personal items Grandpa wanted Mrs. Dorothy to have, including Grandma Eleanor's wedding ring and a small locket that had belonged to the family for generations. "He saved Grandma Eleanor's ring for me," said Mrs. Dorothy, her voice heavy with emotion. "I always admired that ring when I was young." Marcus was overcome by a wave of remorse. How many opportunities had he missed to know his grandfather better? How many important conversations never happened because he assumed the old man was distant and uninterested in the family? "Mom, when you're discharged, we want you to come live with us for a while," he said, making a spontaneous decision. "At least until you're fully recovered." Mrs. Dorothy looked at her son in surprise. "I don't want to be a burden to you." "It's not a burden, Mom, it's family. And I'm starting to understand how important that is." Sarah smiled, supporting her husband's decision. She had always had a good relationship with her mother-in-law, but knew Marcus sometimes kept a certain distance, inherited from the formal and reserved upbringing he'd received. After leaving the hospital, they went directly to the house of Aunt Christine, Marcus's sister, and the first person on Grandpa's list of letters. Christine lived in a small but well-kept house in the city centre, where she had worked as a seamstress for over 20 years. Christine, a 45-year-old woman with brown hair tied in a bun and skilled hands marked by years of sewing, received the visitors with surprise. She wasn't expecting a visit, especially in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. "Marcus, Sarah, what a surprise! Is something wrong?" she asked, worried. Marcus briefly told her about the discovery in the tree and handed her the letter addressed to his sister. Christine was familiar with the stories about their father's strange habits, but never imagined there was a specific reason for them. She opened the letter and began to read silently. Her expression gradually changed, shifting from curiosity to sadness, and finally to a mix of relief and regret. "What does it say?" asked Marcus. Christine wiped the tears that had formed in her eyes and shared the content. "Christine, my dear daughter, I need to ask your forgiveness for not being the father you deserved. I know you always felt less loved than your brother, but that was never true. I just didn't know how to handle having a daughter. Your mother was always much better at that than I was." Christine stopped reading, clearly moved by the words. "I always thought Dad preferred Marcus," she confessed, "because he was a boy and could help with the heavy work." Marcus felt uncomfortable. He had never realized his sister felt this way, and now he saw that perhaps he had indeed received more attention from their father without being aware of it. Christine continued reading. "You were always the smartest of my children, Christine. I saw how you understood things quickly, how you solved problems that left others confused. But I was a simple man and didn't know how to encourage a girl to use her intelligence. I thought it would be better to teach you domestic work." "That explains a lot," murmured Christine. "I remember trying to show him some inventions I made as a child, but he always said I should focus on girl things." Marcus vaguely remembered Christine always inventing little devices and improvements to make household tasks easier. At the time, he thought it was normal that their father didn't pay attention to it, but now he realized how frustrating it must have been for his sister. Grandpa William's letter continued with specific requests for forgiveness and recognition of the skills Christine had always shown. He admitted he was influenced by the times, when girls were expected to follow traditional roles, but that he had always felt a secret pride in his daughter's intelligence and creativity. "Christine," said Marcus after she finished reading, "I want to apologize too. I never realized how you felt." Christine looked at him with surprise. "Why?" "Because I probably took advantage of Dad's extra attention without questioning if it was fair, and because after he died, I should have been a better brother." This was a revealing moment for both siblings. They realized that many family misunderstandings could have been avoided with more communication and fewer assumptions about each other's feelings. Christine carefully put the letter away and invited Marcus and Sarah to stay for coffee. During the conversation that followed, they discovered many things about the family they never knew. Christine said she always wanted to study engineering when she was young, but never had the courage to mention it to her father. Instead, she learned sewing, which was considered more appropriate for women at the time. But even working as a seamstress, she always applied her creativity, developing new techniques and creating unique designs. "You should show your work to more people," suggested Sarah. "Some of the techniques you developed might interest other seamstresses." Christine smiled timidly. "I've always thought about that, but never had the courage." Marcus had an idea. "What if we helped you set up a small workshop on Grandpa William's property? There's enough space and you could teach your techniques to others." The proposal excited Christine. For the first time in years, she glimpsed the possibility of expanding her professional horizons in a way that honored both her skills and her father's memory. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the days that followed, Marcus and Sarah continued delivering the letters left by their grandfather. Each visit revealed more layers of old William's complex personality and of the family relationships that had been misunderstood over the years. The next stop was at the house of Godfather James, a 68-year-old man who had been Grandpa William's childhood friend. James had lived alone since his wife's death 3 years prior, in a simple house on the outskirts of town. He spent his days tending a small garden and receiving occasional visits from his children who lived in other cities. James received Marcus and Sarah with genuine joy. He had always had a special fondness for his godson, even if they hadn't seen each other often in recent years. "Marcus, my boy, how I've missed you," said the elderly man, hugging his visitor tightly. "And Sarah, how lovely you look. Come in, come in." They sat in James's modest but cozy living room, decorated with old family photographs and objects that clearly had sentimental value. Marcus explained about the discovery of the letters and handed over the one addressed to his godfather. James held the letter with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from old age. He put on his glasses and began to read, his expression changing as he processed the words of his old friend. "William wrote this?" he asked, clearly moved. "Yes, he did. All the letters are in his own handwriting." James continued reading silently for a few minutes. Occasionally, A sad smile crossed his face, interspersed with expressions of surprise and emotion. "May I read some parts to you?" he asked. Marcus nodded, curious to know what his grandfather had to say about his long friendship with James. "James, my lifelong godfather, this letter is to ask your forgiveness for having been too proud a friend. We fought over a silly thing more than 15 years ago, and my pride never let me take the first step to reconcile." James stopped reading and looked at Marcus. "Do you know about our fight?" Marcus shook his head no. He knew that his godfather and his grandfather had grown distant in the last years of his grandfather's life, but he never knew the reason. "It was because of politics," James explained with a sad smile. "A silly argument about candidates in the 2008 election. We were both too stubborn to admit that a 50-year friendship was more important than political opinions." He continued reading the letter. "James, you were always more than a godfather to me. You were the brother I never had. When we were young, you helped me in difficult times without ever asking for anything in return. When my Eleanor got sick, you and your wife took care of my children as if they were your own." Marcus did not know this story. During his grandmother's terminal illness, when he was too young to understand what was happening, he had apparently been cared for by his godfather and his wife. "Is that true?" he asked. James nodded, his eyes glistening with held-back tears. "Your grandfather was desperate, trying to work and take care of Eleanor at the same time. My wife and I stayed with you and Christine for almost 3 months. They were difficult days for the whole family." The letter continued with the grandfather acknowledging that he had never properly thanked them for that help, and that their later fight had been an unconscious way of distancing himself from someone to whom he felt indebted. "James, I want you to know that I thought of you every day in these years we didn't speak. Whenever I passed by your house, I wanted to stop and knock on the door, but my pride spoke louder. Forgive me for being so stubborn." James folded the letter carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "Your grandfather was a good man, Marcus. It was just hard for him to express feelings. He was from a time when men were raised to be strong and silent." "Godfather, why did you never reconcile?" asked Marcus. James sighed deeply. "Pride, my boy. Pure pride. I was also waiting for him to make the first move. We both kept waiting, and time passed. When I realized he was truly sick, it was too late." Sarah felt touched by the story. It was amazing how two people who loved each other like brothers could go years without speaking because of wounded pride. "Godfather, what do you think about coming with us to visit the tree where we found the letters?" she suggested. "I think you would like to see the place that was so special to Grandpa William." James accepted the suggestion with enthusiasm. They arranged to go the following Sunday, and Marcus promised to show all the discoveries and tell more details about what they had found. The next letter on the list was addressed to cousin David, a 50-year-old man who worked as a mechanic in the neighboring town. David and Marcus had been close in childhood, but grew apart as adults due to differences in personality and lifestyle. David lived in a workshop he had built himself in the backyard of his house. He was a man skilled with his hands, able to fix any kind of machine, but also known for his difficult temper and tendency to isolate himself when things didn't go as expected. When Marcus and Sarah arrived at the workshop, they found David working on an old engine. He was dirty with grease and clearly focused on his work, but stopped everything when he saw the visitors. "Marcus!" he exclaimed, wiping his hands on an old rag. "What a surprise! I haven't seen you in... how long, 2 years?" "At least," agreed Marcus. "How are you, David?" "Getting by, you know how it is. Always a car to fix, always a bill to pay." He paused and looked more closely at his cousin. "But you have a strange look on your face. Did something happen?" Marcus explained about the discovery of the letters and handed over the one addressed to David. The mechanic was visibly surprised to learn that his uncle had left a letter specifically for him. "Uncle William wrote to me?" he asked, clearly moved. "But we hardly ever talked." "Exactly why," said Marcus. "It seems he had important things to say that he never managed to." David read the letter in silence, his face going through a series of emotions. When he finished, he spent a few minutes looking at the paper, processing what he had read. "He asks for forgiveness for criticizing me so much when I was young," David said finally, "and says he always admired my skill with machines." Marcus was surprised. He didn't remember Grandpa criticizing David, but maybe he wasn't paying attention at the time. David continued, "When I was a teenager, I took apart everything I could find to understand how it worked. Old cars, broken radios, anything with screws. Uncle William always said I was too messy and should focus on my studies." "And that bothered you?" "A lot. I thought he didn't understand that was my way of learning. I stopped going to his house because I got tired of hearing I was a problem child." The grandfather's letter revealed a completely different perspective. William admitted he criticized David, not because he disapproved of his activities, but because he was afraid the boy would get hurt messing with dangerous machines. At the time, he didn't know how to express his concern in a constructive way. "David, you always had a special talent for understanding how things work. I saw it since you were little, but I didn't know how to encourage you without putting you at risk. My way of showing concern sounded like criticism, and I apologize for that." The letter went on to explain that the grandfather had always followed David's career from afar, feeling proud when he learned that he had set up his own workshop and become respected in the area as a skilled mechanic. "He knew about the workshop?" asked David, surprised. "From what the letter says, he knew and felt proud." David folded the letter and put it away carefully. "You know something, Marcus? I spent years thinking Uncle William didn't like me. That affected me more than I wanted to admit." Marcus understood the feeling. He himself had spent years assuming Grandpa was distant and uninterested, when in fact the man simply didn't know how to express his feelings. "David, there's something I wanted to ask you," said Marcus. "We're thinking about making some improvements to Grandpa's land, maybe building a workshop for Christine to work in. Would you be willing to consult on equipment and facilities?" David smiled for the first time since they had arrived. "Of course, cousin. It would be a pleasure to help. And thank you for bringing the letter. It means a lot to me." The next person on the list was Mrs. Margaret, a 75-year-old elderly neighbor who had been a close friend of Grandma Eleanor. Mrs. Margaret lived alone in a small, well-kept house, surrounded by a lush garden that she maintained herself despite her advanced age. When Marcus and Sarah arrived at Mrs. Margaret's house, she was watering the plants in the front garden. Despite the years, she remained active and lucid, with completely white hair pulled into a low bun and blue eyes that still shone with vitality. "Marcus, my boy," she exclaimed, dropping the hose to hug the visitor. "What a joy to see you. And Sarah, dear, how are you?" Mrs. Margaret invited them in and insisted on preparing coffee and homemade cookies. Her home was an example of organization and simple good taste, with well-preserved antique furniture and fresh flowers in several rooms. "Mrs. Margaret, we brought something special for you," said Marcus, handing her the letter. She took the letter curiously, put on her glasses, and began to read. As her eyes moved over the lines written by her grandfather, her expression changed to a mixture of nostalgia and emotion. "William was always a man of few words," she commented after a few minutes of silent reading. "But when he wrote, he chose each word carefully." Marcus and Sarah waited patiently while Mrs. Margaret finished reading. When she was done, she folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. "What did he write, Mrs. Margaret?" Sarah asked gently. The elderly woman smiled tenderly. "He thanks me for taking care of Eleanor during her illness, and he asks forgiveness for never having properly expressed his gratitude." Mrs. Margaret explained that during the last months of Grandma Eleanor's life, she had practically moved into the Bennett house to help with medical and domestic care. It was a time when there weren't many resources for palliative care, and the family relied entirely on the support of friends and neighbors. "I loved Eleanor like a sister," said Mrs. Margaret. "Taking care of her wasn't a favor, it was a privilege. But William always felt indebted to me for it." The letter revealed that Grandpa considered himself responsible for having stolen months of Mrs. Margaret's life to care for his wife. He could never find the right words to express his gratitude, and this difficulty tormented him for decades. "Mrs. Margaret, do you have children?" asked Marcus, realizing he always saw her alone. "I had a son, but he passed away in an accident 15 years ago," she replied serenely. "He was an only child, so it's just been me since then." Marcus felt a pang of guilt. Mrs. Margaret had practically been family during his childhood, but after he grew up, he rarely visited her. She had been present at important family moments, But when she needed support, she was alone. "Would you like to come with us to Grandpa's land on Sunday?" he asked, feeling it was time to repay a little of the affection she had always shown the family. Mrs. Margaret accepted with joy. "That would be wonderful. I haven't been there in years. I have so many memories of that place." She told stories about the times she went to the land with Grandma Eleanor. The two women used to sit in the shade of the big tree to talk and do handiwork. Mrs. Margaret remembered clearly how special the tree was to Grandpa William, who always treated it with an almost reverential care. "I always suspected that tree had some special meaning for William," she said. "He would talk to it when he thought no one was watching." This revelation intrigued Marcus and Sarah. The idea that Grandpa talked to the tree added a new layer of mystery to the discovery they had made. In the days that followed, Marcus and Sarah finished delivering all the letters in the collection. Each visit revealed more aspects of Grandpa William's complex personality and the family connections that had been misunderstood or lost over time. During this process, they discovered that their grandfather had impacted many more lives than they had imagined. There were letters for former co-workers, for shopkeepers he had known for decades, and even for the doctor who had cared for Grandma Eleanor. Each letter followed a similar pattern: requests for forgiveness for excessive pride, acknowledgement of kindnesses that had never been properly thanked, and expressions of affection that had been kept inside for years. The emotional impact of these discoveries was profound for everyone involved. Relationships that had grown cold were rekindled, old misunderstandings were cleared up, and a new understanding of the importance of emotional communication spread among all who received the letters. Marcus also began to reflect deeply on his own life and relationships. Seeing how his grandfather had regretted not expressing his feelings properly, he decided he would not make the same mistakes. On Thursday of the following week, Marcus made an important decision. He called his daughter Emily, an 18-year-old who was studying at a university in the capital. They had grown distant in recent months due to disagreements about her academic choices. "Hi, Dad," answered Emily, her voice full of surprise. They hadn't spoken in almost a month. "Emily, sweetheart, I need to talk to you. Can you come home this weekend?" "Is something wrong? Is Grandma okay?" "Grandma's great. Actually, everything is fine. But I've discovered some important things about our family, and I want to share them with you. And also," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I also want to apologize for some things." Emily was silent for a few seconds, clearly surprised by her father's tone. Marcus rarely talked about feelings or admitted mistakes. "Dad, are you sure everything's okay?" she asked, concerned. "I'm better than I've been in years, honey. I've just learned some important lessons about family and about the importance of saying what we feel before it's too late." Emily agreed to come on Saturday. Marcus hung up the phone, feeling a mix of nervousness and relief. He knew there were difficult things to discuss with his daughter, but now he understood it was better to face hard conversations than to carry regrets for decades. On the appointed Sunday, the grandfather's property became the family's meeting point. Marcus and Sarah had invited everyone who received letters to a special gathering around the centuries-old tree. Mrs. Dorothy arrived first, leaning on a cane but visibly in better health. The medical treatment had been successful, and she was in the process of recovery. In her hands she carried Grandma Eleanor's wedding ring and the family locket that Grandpa William had left for her. Christine arrived soon after, accompanied by a folder full of sketches and plans for the sewing workshop she planned to open. During the week she had developed several ideas for using part of the family land productively. David came with a list of suggestions for improvements to the property, including proposals to install electricity in the area where Christine wanted to work, and ideas for making better use of the available space. James arrived walking slowly, but with determination, carrying a small sapling wrapped in newspaper. "I want to plant this near William's tree," he explained. "It's a yellow EP sapling that grew in my backyard. I think he would like to have more trees around here." Mrs. Margaret was the last to arrive, bringing a basket of homemade cookies and a thermos of coffee. "I couldn't come empty-handed," she said with a smile. "Eleanor always said family gatherings need good food." Emily had arrived the night before and spent the morning talking with her parents about the discoveries related to her great-grandfather. She was fascinated by the stories and asked to see all the letters that had been found. "Dad, this is incredible," she said, examining the great-grandfather's careful handwriting. "It's like he left a manual on how not to make the same mistakes he made." Marcus nodded. That was exactly how he saw the situation. Grandpa William's letters were more than apologies. They were life lessons about the importance of emotional communication and the courage to express feelings. When everyone was gathered around the tree, Marcus positioned himself near the trunk and began to speak. "I wanted to thank you all for coming today. You know, this week has been special for our family. We discovered things about Grandpa William that completely changed our understanding of him and of ourselves." He looked at each person present before continuing, "But the most important thing we learned is that we can't wait to tell the people we love how much they mean to us." Grandpa spent years holding in feelings and regrets, and it tormented him until the end of his life. Marcus turned to his daughter. "Emily, I want to start by asking for your forgiveness. In the last few months, I've been too stubborn about your plans to study art instead of following a more practical profession. I was repeating the same mistake Grandpa made with Aunt Christine." Emily approached her father with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I understand you're worried about my future." "No, honey. I trust you and your abilities. If you have a passion for art, then that's what you should pursue, and I will support your decision completely." Father and daughter hugged, and Marcus felt as if a huge weight had lifted from his shoulders. Expressing his feelings had been easier and more liberating than he imagined. Christine approached David. "Cousin, I've always admired how you understand machines. When we were kids, I was jealous of your skill. I wanted to ask you to teach me some basic things about equipment for the workshop." David smiled broadly. "Of course, Christine, and I want to learn about your sewing techniques. My wife always complains that I can't even sew on a button." Mrs. Margaret approached Mrs. Dorothy. "Dorothy, dear, I have a proposal for you. How about we take care of the garden here on the property together? I know a lot about plants, and you've always had a green thumb for flowers." The two ladies immediately began planning flower beds and discussing which plants would be most suitable for the property's soil. James, who had remained silent observing the interactions, approached the century-old tree and placed his hand on the trunk, exactly as he had seen his friend William do so many times. "Godfather," he said, speaking to the tree, as if the grandfather could hear him, "you achieved what you always wanted. You brought the family together again." Marcus watched the scene with emotion. In a week, that tree had transformed from an obstacle into a symbol of family unity. What began as a frustrated attempt to remove something inconvenient had become the most important discovery of their lives. Sarah approached her husband and held his hand. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking that Grandpa was much wiser than we imagined. He knew that one day someone would try to cut down the tree, and he planned everything so that it would lead to the right discoveries." Marcus looked around, seeing family and friends sharing stories, making plans for the future, and building connections that had been lost over the years. The property he had almost sold was becoming the emotional heart of the extended family. "Sarah, I have an idea," he said. "What if we turned this place into a permanent family gathering center? Christine can have her workshop. My mother and Mrs. Margaret can tend to the garden, and we can build a space where everyone can meet regularly." Sarah smiled, admiring her husband's vision. "I think it would be perfect, and the tree would be the center of everything." Marcus called everyone's attention to share his idea. The proposal was met with enthusiasm. David immediately began thinking about practical improvements. Christine visualized how her workshop would integrate into the space, and the older ladies started planning a community garden. Emily suggested documenting the entire process through photographs and perhaps creating a family album that included the great-grandfather's letters and the story of the discovery. "It would be a way to preserve these lessons for future generations," she said. The meeting lasted the entire afternoon. They explored every corner of the land, identifying where each activity could take place. The century-old tree would remain as the central point, untouched and respected as the symbol of Grandpa William's wisdom. David suggested building circular benches around the tree, creating a natural space for meetings and conversations. Christine proposed planting seasonal flowers that would attract butterflies and birds. Mrs. Margaret and Mrs. Dorothy were already planning a medicinal herb and spice garden. As the sun began to set, James planted his yellow ipi sapling in a carefully chosen spot. "This tree will grow alongside our renewed family," he said, watering the little sapling with water he had brought from his own home. Before everyone left, Marcus wanted to make one last symbolic gesture. He approached the opening in the tree trunk, which had been carefully preserved, and placed inside it a new letter he had written during the week. "What did you write?" asked Emily, curious. "A promise," replied Marcus. "I promise that our family will never again leave important feelings unexpressed, and that this tree will continue to be the place where we keep our history and our commitments to each other." In the months that followed, Grandpa William's land transformed exactly as they had planned. Christine opened her sewing workshop and began teaching traditional techniques to local young women interested in learning handicrafts. Her self-esteem grew enormously as she saw her skills being recognized and valued. David coordinated all the technical improvements on the property, installing electricity, running water, and an irrigation system for the garden. He discovered he enjoyed working on community projects and began offering similar services to other families in the region. Mrs. Dorothy and Mrs. Margaret became inseparable partners in caring for the garden. They planted an organic vegetable garden that provided fresh produce for the whole family, and they created a flower garden that attracted visitors from other towns. James became the family's official chronicler, recording old stories that might have been lost and documenting the new traditions being created. His previous loneliness was replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. Emily divided her time between her studies in the capital and long stays at the family property. Using her artistic creativity to visually document the transformations, she created a series of paintings showing the century-old tree in different seasons and the family's emotional states. Marcus discovered he had leadership abilities he had never explored. Coordinating the family project awakened in him an interest in community work, and he began to get involved in other rural development projects in the region. Sarah became the family's emotional facilitator, helping to mediate difficult conversations and ensuring that the lessons learned from Grandpa William's letters were applied in daily interactions. She developed a special skill for helping people express feelings constructively. The property became known in the area as the place of the special tree. Other families began to visit to learn the story and be inspired by the transformation that had happened there. Marcus and Sarah started receiving requests to help other people resolve family conflicts using the lessons they had learned. 1 year after discovering the letters, the family organized a big celebration on the property. Everyone who had received letters from Grandpa William was present, along with new friends they had met throughout the transformation process. During the celebration, Marcus gave an emotional speech about how a simple attempt to cut down a tree had turned into the most meaningful experience of their lives. He spoke about the importance of facing obstacles with curiosity instead of brute force, and about how sometimes what seems to be in our way is actually exactly where we need to be. Grandpa William taught us that holding on to feelings is like planting seeds and never watering them, said Marcus. They can survive for a while, but they never bloom. It was only when we had the courage to open our hearts that our family truly blossomed. Christine, who had gained confidence in public speaking through her sewing classes, shared her perspective on how rediscovering her passions had transformed her life. David spoke about the joy of using his skills to help the family instead of working just to earn money. The older ladies, Mrs. Dorothy and Mrs. Margaret, became symbols of how age can bring wisdom and renewed purpose instead of isolation. They inspired other seniors in the region to become more actively involved in family and community activities. James, moved, planted a second tree sapling on the property, this time a Brazil wood tree. "So that future generations may have shade and beauty," he said, using the same words that Grandpa William used to repeat. Emily revealed her special project, an illustrated book telling the story of the tree and the family discoveries. She had documented the entire process through drawings, photographs, and interviews with each family member. The book would be an inheritance for future generations and a source of inspiration for other families facing similar challenges. During the celebration, an unexpected surprise happened. An elderly man whom no one knew approached the group. He introduced himself as Theodore, a former apprentice of Grandpa William from the days when he worked as a carpenter. "Sorry to interrupt the party," said Theodore, clearly emotional, "but I heard about the story of the letters and came to tell you something you need to know about Mr. William." Marcus invited Theodore to join the circle around the tree. The man, who was about 70 years old, explained that he had worked with Grandpa William during his youth and had learned much more than woodworking techniques. "Mr. William taught me that a good carpenter doesn't force wood to be what it's not," said Theodore. "He used to tell me that every piece of wood has its own personality, and our job is to discover what it is and respect it." Theodore recounted that Grandpa William applied this philosophy not just to work but to life. He believed that trying to force situations or people to change was always counterproductive. It was better to observe, understand, and find ways to work in harmony with the natural characteristics of each situation. "That explains why he never tried to force emotional conversations," reflected Marcus. "He was waiting for the right moment, the right situation." Theodore nodded. "Exactly. And he always said that the best discoveries come when we stop forcing and start observing. I think that's exactly what happened with you and the tree. This revelation added a new layer of meaning to the family story. Grandpa wasn't simply a man who had difficulty expressing feelings. He was someone who deeply understood timing and the importance of letting things develop naturally." Marcus realized that during his frustrated attempt to cut down the tree, he had applied exactly the approach his grandfather tried to avoid: brute force instead of observation and understanding. Only when he stopped forcing and began to investigate did the true discoveries happen. From this understanding, Marcus developed a new personal philosophy about problem solving. Instead of attacking obstacles with force, he learned to first observe, understand, and look for creative ways to work with situations rather than against them. This approach proved valuable not only in family matters, but also in his professional life. Marcus began to be sought out by other carpenters in the region to help with difficult projects, applying the lessons he had learned about patience and observation. 2 years after the initial discovery, Grandpa's land had transformed into a true community center. Christine's workshop served young people from 3 neighboring towns. The Ladies' Garden supplied products for a weekly organic market. David had expanded his services and created a cooperative of carpenters and mechanics. The century-old tree remained the heart of it all, its roots now accompanied by the roots of new trees planted by James and other visitors who wanted to contribute to the family grove. Marcus installed a small discreet plaque near the tree with a simple message: "Sometimes what seems to be in our way is exactly where we need to be." The message became known in the region and inspired others to rethink their approaches to facing challenges. Emily finished her university studies and decided to return to the region to develop a rural tourism project based on family stories. She created itineraries that included visits to the special trees land, along with other rural properties that had interesting stories to tell. Emily's project attracted visitors from various parts of the country, interested in learning real examples of how families had overcome challenges through improved communication and collaboration. Grandpa's land became a symbol of hope for people facing family conflicts or feeling they had lost important connections with their loved ones. 3 years after the discovery of the letters, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was from a national television program that had heard about the family's story and wanted to do a report on family transformation and emotional communication. Initially, Marcus hesitated. The story was very personal, and he wasn't sure he wanted to expose it nationally. But after talking with the family, everyone agreed that sharing the experience could help other people facing similar situations. The report aired during prime time and had a much greater impact than anyone expected. Thousands of people made contact through social media, sharing their own stories of family conflicts and asking for advice on how to start reconciliation processes. Marcus and Sarah found themselves responding to hundreds of messages from people who identified with different aspects of the story. There were children who had distanced themselves from proud parents, parents who didn't know how to connect with their adult children, and entire families that had been divided by misunderstandings that had persisted for years. The demand for guidance became so great that Marcus decided to create an informal support group that met monthly on the tree's property. The meetings were open to anyone interested in learning about family communication and conflict resolution. Christine joined the project, offering hands-on activities during the meetings. She discovered that teaching sewing and other crafts created a relaxing environment where people felt more comfortable sharing difficult personal experiences. David contributed by teaching small woodworking projects that could be done as a family. He found that working together on practical projects often led to important conversations that wouldn't happen in more formal settings. Mrs. Margaret and Mrs. Dorothy specialized in offering perspectives from different generations on family conflicts. Their life experience and practical wisdom proved invaluable in helping younger people understand the viewpoints of older family members. James developed a special skill for helping people identify negative family patterns that repeated across generations. His own experience of decades of pride that nearly cost a precious friendship made him particularly effective in helping others overcome similar barriers. The support group grew organically and began attracting participants from distant towns. Marcus realized there was a real and widespread need for spaces where families could learn about healthy emotional communication. This led him to an important decision. 5 years after the discovery of the letters, Marcus decided to formalize the project by creating a small non-profit organization dedicated to promoting healthy family communication and conflict resolution. The organization, named Deep Roots in honor of the century-old tree, began offering workshops, educational materials, and family mediation sessions. All the original family members became involved in some way, each contributing their unique skills. Emily became responsible for documentation and communication, creating visual materials and maintaining a blog that shared success stories and practical resources. Christine developed therapeutic activities using crafts. David created family projects that helped people work together on common goals. The older ladies became counselors and mentors, offering perspective and wisdom for complex situations. James specialized in family stories and helped people identify positive and negative patterns in their lineages. The century-old tree remained the central symbol of the organization. Its image appeared on all educational materials, representing the idea that apparent obstacles often hide opportunities for growth and discovery. Marcus developed a methodology based on the family's experience, which he called the tree approach. The method emphasized patience, careful observation, and the pursuit of understanding rather than forced solutions. The methodology included 5 main steps. Stop forcing, recognizing when aggressive strategies aren't working. Observe carefully, looking for signs and patterns that may have been overlooked. Investigate with curiosity, asking questions instead of assuming answers. Discover hidden treasures, identifying positive aspects in seemingly negative situations, and build from discoveries, using new understandings to create sustainable solutions. The method proved effective for a wide variety of family conflicts. Couples on the brink of divorce discovered ways to reconnect. Parents and teenagers found common ground, and families divided for years managed to reconcile. One particularly striking case involved a 50-year-old woman who had lost contact with her parents after a fight about her career choice 20 years earlier. Using the tree approach, she was able to identify that the real problem wasn't her career, but her parents' difficulty in accepting that she had grown up and made independent decisions. Instead of continuing to try to prove she was right about her career, she began to focus on demonstrating that she still valued her parents' opinion and love. She just wanted to exercise them as an adult. The change in approach led to an emotional reconciliation and the re-establishment of a close relationship. Another case involved 2 brothers who had fought over an inheritance and hadn't spoken in 10 years. Applying the method, they discovered that the fight over money was masking a deeper competition for their deceased father's approval. Once they recognized this, they were able to work together to honor their father's memory in ways that were meaningful to both of them. The Deep Roots organization grew slowly but consistently. Marcus made a point of keeping the growth controlled to preserve the quality of the services and the personal attention that had been key to the initial success. 6 years after the discovery of the letters, the family organized a special celebration to mark the anniversary. The land had been completely transformed, but the century-old tree remained the focal point of everything. During the celebration, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened since that frustrating day when he tried to cut down the tree. If someone had told me 6 years ago that trying to cut down a tree would lead to creating an organization that helps families across the country, I would have laughed, he said to the gathered crowd. But I've learned that life's greatest gifts often come disguised as problems. He looked at each family member before continuing. Grandpa William knew something it took me 40 years to understand, that patience and observation are more powerful than force, that curiosity is more useful than certainty, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop fighting and start listening. The celebration included the planting of another tree, this time a jabuticaba tree that had been suggested by a child who regularly visited the land with her parents for the support group meetings. This tree will grow alongside all the families who found healing here, said the 8-year-old girl, carefully watering the sapling. And when I'm old like Mrs. Margaret, I'll be able to tell stories about how it grew big. During the celebration, several people shared how the family's story had impacted their own lives. A man spoke about how he had reconciled with his son after years of silence. A woman described how she had learned to express gratitude to her parents before it was too late. An elderly couple told how they had used the tree approach to resolve conflicts with their adult children who had moved far away. A young woman explained how she had applied the principles to improve relationships at university. Each story reinforced the same fundamental lesson, that honest, emotional communication requires courage, but produces results that transform lives in unexpected and profound ways. As the celebration stretched into the night, Marcus found himself standing alone next to the century-old tree. He placed his hand on the same spot where so many generations of his family had touched, feeling a deep connection to the past and the future. Sarah approached and stood by his side in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, repeating the same question she had asked so many times over the years. "I'm thinking about how Grandpa managed to create such a powerful legacy through letters he never delivered, and a tree we could never cut down," replied Marcus with a smile. "He found a way to teach us his most important lessons exactly when we were ready to learn them." Marcus looked around, seeing dozens of people from different families sharing stories, laughing together, and building connections that hadn't existed before that night. The land he had almost sold out of financial desperation had become a center of healing and growth for hundreds of people. "Sarah, do you think Grandpa planned all of this?" he asked her. She considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't think he could predict exactly what would happen, but I think he understood something about planting seeds and trusting the growth process. He planted seeds of love, forgiveness, and communication, and trusted that one day they would find fertile soil." Marcus nodded, feeling the truth in his wife's words. Grandpa William had understood something fundamental about how positive change happens, not through force or control, but by preparing the right conditions and allowing natural transformations to occur at the right time. This understanding had become the guiding principle of the Deep Roots organization and the approach Marcus used to help other families. Instead of trying to force specific reconciliations or changes, they focused on creating conditions where honest communication could flourish naturally. As the night wore on and people gradually began to leave, Marcus made a decision. He walked to the center of the circle, where everyone could still hear him, and made a special announcement. "All of you have helped our family grow in ways we never imagined possible," he said. "Now we want to give back. Starting today, we are officially opening this land as a permanent center for any family that needs a safe place to reconnect." He explained that they were establishing a fund to keep the land accessible for families who couldn't afford traditional family therapy services. The space would be maintained through voluntary donations and the work of volunteers who had benefited from the programs. "The only rule is that each family that receives help here commits to helping another family in the future," said Marcus. "We want to create a support network that keeps growing naturally." The proposal was met with enthusiasm. Several people immediately volunteered, and some families who had previously benefited from the programs pledged to contribute financially to the fund. Mrs. Margaret, now over 80, but still sharp and active, approached Marcus with a suggestion. "Marcus, my dear, I want to leave my house to the organization when I'm gone," she said with the calmness of someone who had made peace with mortality. It's a good house, and it could be used to host families who come from far away to participate in the programs. Marcus was moved by the generosity of the old family friend. Mrs. Margaret's house was near the land and would be perfect for accommodating visitors. Mrs. Margaret, that would be wonderful, but we hope to have you with us for many more years, he replied affectionately. And you will, she said with a mischievous smile, but it's good to have these things in order. I learned from William's letters that we shouldn't wait until we're gone to express our feelings. James approached the group. Dorothy and I had an idea too, he said, referring to Marcus's mother, who had become his constant companion in maintaining the garden. We want to create a special program for grandparents who have lost contact with their grandchildren. The idea was brilliant. Many family conflicts resulted in grandparents being prevented from developing relationships with grandchildren, or grandchildren growing up without knowing their grandparents due to fights between the middle generations. Mrs. Dorothy, who had become a mother figure to many people participating in the programs, would be perfect to lead this initiative. Her own experience of almost losing the relationship with her son due to misunderstandings uniquely qualified her to help others in similar situations. David, who had been observing the conversation, approached with his own proposal. And what if we created a community tool library here, he suggested. Many families could benefit from having access to tools to do projects together at home. The idea fit perfectly with the organization's philosophy. Working together on practical projects had proven to be an effective way to build family connections and create opportunities for important conversations. Christine also had a contribution. I want to expand the craft workshops to include different types of activities that might interest men too, she said. Maybe basic woodworking, gardening, or even cooking. Emily, who had been documenting the celebration through photographs and notes, approached with a more ambitious proposal. Dad, what if we created a documentary about this whole story, she suggested. Not just about our family, but about all the families impacted by the programs. It could help spread these ideas to many more people. Marcus considered the proposal. A documentary could truly amplify the organization's impact, but it would also bring more attention and responsibility. They would have to make sure they were prepared to handle the resulting growth. It's an interesting idea, daughter, he said. But let's first make sure we have adequate systems here before inviting additional national attention. The conversation continued late into the night, with each person contributing ideas about how to expand and improve the programs. Marcus was impressed with the creativity and dedication of everyone involved. When finally everyone had left, only the immediate family remained on the grounds. They sat in the circle of benches around the ancient tree, watching the stars on a clear summer night. Marcus, said Sarah after a long period of contemplative silence, do you have any regrets about how everything happened? He considered the question carefully. There had been difficult moments over the years. The process of creating and maintaining the organization had required significant sacrifices of time and energy. His life had become much more complicated and full of responsibilities than when he was simply a local carpenter. No regrets, he finally answered. Of course, sometimes I wonder what our life would have been like if I had managed to cut down the tree that first day. We probably would have sold the land, paid off Mother's debts, and continued living a normal, simple life. He paused, looking at the tree that had become the center of so many transformations. But normal and simple doesn't necessarily mean better. We discovered purposes we never knew we had. We built relationships we never imagined possible, and we learned lessons that fundamentally changed who we are as people. Emily, who had decided to spend the night on the grounds in a tent set up near the tree, joined the conversation. Dad, there's one thing I've always wanted to ask you, she said. Do you ever dream about great-grandpa William? Marcus smiled. Constantly, and you? Me too. It's strange, because I was very young when he died and barely remember him when he was alive. But in the dreams he's always working on some woodworking project, and from time to time he stops and says wise things. Sarah laughed softly. I have those dreams too, and I wasn't even related to him. I think when someone leaves such a strong legacy, their presence continues to be felt in mystical ways. Marcus reflected on this, There were moments over the years when he felt as if his grandpa was guiding decisions or inspiring ideas. It wasn't a supernatural feeling, but an awareness that there were principles and values he had inherited that influenced his choices. "I think Grandpa is still teaching us," said Marcus, "not in a supernatural way, but through the seeds of wisdom he planted. Every time we apply patience instead of force, or curiosity instead of certainty, we are honoring what he tried to teach us." The family continued talking until dawn, sharing memories, dreams for the future, and gratitude for the unexpected path their lives had taken. When the sun began to rise, illuminating the ancient tree and all the transformed land around it, Marcus felt a deep sense of completeness. 7 years after the discovery of the letters, the Bennett family's story had become a legend in the region. The Special Trees property received visitors from all over the country, and the Deep Roots organization had helped hundreds of families reconcile and strengthen their bonds. Marcus, now recognized as a family communication expert, was often invited to speak at universities and conferences, but he always made a point of returning home and spending time near the tree that had changed his life. The ancient tree continued to grow, its roots spreading ever deeper into the soil, symbolically connected to the family roots that had been strengthened and expanded over the years. New branches grew each season, just as new family relationships continued to flourish through the organization's work. Marcus never tried to cut the tree down again. Instead, he cared for it tenderly, pruning branches when necessary, but always respecting its essential nature. The tree had become for him a constant reminder that some things in life should not be removed or changed, but honored and cared for. The last letter Marcus had placed in the tree's hollow trunk remained there, along with new letters that other family members had added over the years. The tradition of writing promises and gratitudes to be kept in the tree had become a family ritual that happened on each anniversary of the original discovery. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. 10 years had passed since that day when Marcus first tried to cut down the ancient tree. The property had transformed into a true family sanctuary, known regionally as the Wisdom Tree Space. The Deep Roots organization had grown beyond all expectations, but Marcus made sure to maintain its original values of personal care and individual attention. Mrs. Dorothy, now 83 years old, remained active in the community garden, though she needed more breaks between activities. She had become a revered figure among the visitors, known for her practical wisdom and her ability to offer advice that touched people's hearts. Mrs. Margaret had passed away 2 years prior, at 85, leaving her house to the organization as promised. His last project had been planting a rose garden around the new Ipe tree that James had planted at the first family gathering. The roses bloomed magnificently every spring, creating a living memorial for the woman who had dedicated the last years of her life to helping families reconnect. James, now 78, had become the organization's official historian. He kept detailed records of every family that participated in the programs and documented the lessons learned over the years. His library of family stories had become a valuable resource for researchers interested in family dynamics and conflict resolution. Christine had become a respected businesswoman in the region, expanding her sewing workshop to include a vocational training program for at-risk youth. She discovered she had a natural talent for spotting potential in people others had given up on, applying the same patience and careful observation she had learned through the family experience. David had created a workers' cooperative that offered construction and maintenance services with a special focus on community projects. He applied the principles of the tree approach in his projects, always seeking to understand the real needs of clients rather than imposing preconceived solutions. Emily had become an acclaimed documentary filmmaker, specializing in stories of family and community transformation. Her documentary about the Bennett family history had won national awards and inspired the creation of similar programs in other regions of the country. Sarah had developed her facilitation skills to the point of being sought by governmental and non-governmental organizations to help with complex conflict mediation. She kept the tree property as her base of operations, but traveled frequently to apply the methodologies developed by the family in broader contexts. Marcus had become a respected figure in the field of family therapy, though he had never sought formal academic training in the area. His practical, real experience-based approach had proven more effective than many traditional methods, leading universities to invite him as a guest speaker. On this special December morning, Marcus was sitting alone beside the century-old tree, preparing for an important decision. At 52, he felt the time had come to pass the leadership of the organization to the next generation and focus on writing a book documenting everything they had learned. Emily had agreed to take over as executive director of the organization, while Sarah would continue coordinating the family mediation programs. Christine, David, and the other family members would maintain their specialized roles, but the overall responsibility for the organization's vision and direction would pass to younger hands. As he reflected on the decision, Marcus opened the small compartment in the tree trunk where the family letters were kept. He took out the original letter he had written 10 years before, promising that the family would never again leave important feelings unexpressed. Rereading his own words written a decade earlier, Marcus smiled as he realized how much he had grown as a person and as a family leader. The promise had been fulfilled in ways he could never have imagined at the time. He took paper and pen to write a new letter, this time addressed to the future generations of the Bennett family, and to all the families who would be helped by the programs in the years to come. For future generations of the Bennett family, and for all families who find healing in this special place, I am Marcus Bennett, grandson of William Bennett, and I am writing this letter on the 10th anniversary of the discovery that changed our lives forever. If you are reading this, it means the tradition of keeping promises and wisdom in the ancient tree is still alive. When I tried to cut down this tree 10 years ago, I thought I was facing an obstacle. I discovered I was facing the greatest opportunity of my life. The tree taught me that resistance is not always opposition, sometimes it is protection. It was protecting secrets our family needed to discover at the right time. The lessons we learned were simple, but they transformed everything. Patience is more powerful than force. Curiosity is more useful than certainty. Listening is braver than fighting. Expressing love is more important than proving you are right. If you are facing family conflicts, remember that every obstacle may be hiding an opportunity for growth. Do not force solutions. Observe carefully. Ask questions instead of assuming answers. Seek to understand before trying to be understood. This tree will continue growing long after all of us are gone. May it always be a reminder that healthy family relationships require deep roots, strong trunks capable of withstanding storms, and flexible branches that can grow in new directions without breaking. Take care of each other. Express your feelings while there is still time. And remember that the greatest treasure of any family is not the things we keep, but the love we share. With eternal gratitude for the wisdom of Grandpa William and for all the lessons this special tree has taught us. Marcus Bennett, December 2034. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in the secret compartment of the trunk, next to his grandfather's original letters and the other family promises that had been added over the years. At that moment, Emily arrived at the property for the meeting they had scheduled to discuss the leadership transition. She found her father sitting calmly beside the tree, an expression of deep peace on his face. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, sitting on the bench beside him. "I'm better than okay, my dear. I am at peace. I just wrote a letter to the future, and I feel I have fulfilled the mission Grandpa William left me." Emily looked at the ancient tree, its green leaves shimmering in the morning sun. It was hard to imagine that this majestic tree had almost been cut down a decade before. "Dad, are you sure you want to pass on the leadership of the organization? You're still young and have so much to contribute." Marcus smiled, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I will keep contributing, just in a different way. It's time for you, the new generation, to take the ideas in directions I can't even imagine. I've learned that true leadership sometimes means knowing when to give others space to grow." They spent the morning discussing the details of the transition. Emily presented her ideas for expanding the organization's reach through digital platforms and partnerships with other similar organizations. Marcus was impressed with her vision and her deep understanding of the principles that had guided the family's work. "One thing I want to maintain, no matter how much the organization grows," said Emily, "is this connection to the tree and the property. I want there always to be a physical place where people can come to reconnect with what truly matters." Marcus nodded in approval. It was exactly this kind of wisdom that reassured him about passing the leadership to his daughter. In the late afternoon, other family members began to arrive for a special meeting that had been scheduled to formalize the leadership transition. Sarah arrived with Mrs. Dorothy, who now used a wheelchair for longer distances, but maintained her lucidity and willingness for daily activities. Christine came accompanied by 3 of her former students, who had become instructors at the sewing workshop. David brought 2 of the young cooperative members who had started as apprentices and now led their own work teams. James, now walking with the help of a walker but still mentally sharp, brought a special gift, a new tree sapling to plant on the grounds. "It's a Jequitiba," he said proudly. "It will grow slowly, but can live for over 1,000 years." When everyone was gathered around the centuries-old tree, Marcus positioned himself at the center of the circle to give his final official speech as leader of the Deep Roots organization. 10 years ago, I stood in this very spot, frustrated and desperate, trying to cut down this tree that seemed to be in my way. Today, I stand here again, but this time in peace and gratitude, recognizing that this tree was never in my way. It was exactly where I needed to be. Marcus looked at each person present, feeling a deep connection with everyone who had been part of the journey. "You taught me that leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions. It's not about controlling outcomes, but about creating conditions where growth can happen naturally. It's not about being indispensable, but about raising up others who can take the ideas further than you ever could alone." He paused to control the emotion rising in his voice. "Emily, my dear daughter, you are ready to lead this organization into its next chapter. You have the vision to expand our reach and the wisdom to uphold our values. But more important than that, you understand that our true mission is not to save families, but to teach families to save themselves." Emily approached her father with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I promise to honor everything you and the family have built here. And I promise we will always remember that our strength comes from this tree, this place, and the principles we learned together." The transition ceremony was simple but deeply symbolic. Marcus planted the Jequitiba sapling that James had brought, symbolizing continuity and growth that extend far beyond any single generation. Emily made her first official decision as the new leader of the organization, to establish an annual tradition where all families who had been helped by the programs would be invited to return for a special celebration on the tree grounds. "We want to create a permanent network of families supporting each other," she explained, "not just during crises, but as an ongoing community that celebrates successes and faces challenges together." The idea was met with enthusiasm. Several families present immediately offered to help organize the first annual celebration. As the evening wore on and people gradually began to leave, Marcus found himself alone with the centuries-old tree once more. This time, however, he was not carrying the weight of leadership or worries about the organization's future. He was simply present, grateful, and at peace. Sarah approached and stood beside her husband, the 2 of them watching the stars through the tree's branches. "No regrets?" she asked, repeating the question she had asked so many times over the years. "No regrets," Marcus answered without hesitation, "only gratitude and excitement about what comes next." "And what comes next for us?" Marcus smiled, holding his wife's hand. "First, I'm going to finish writing the book about our experiences. Then I want to travel a bit and meet other organizations doing similar work. And maybe—" He paused, looking at the tree. "Maybe it's time we start thinking about grandchildren." Sarah laughed. "Emily doesn't even have a serious boyfriend yet." "But Christine has a 16-year-old daughter, and David has 2 teenage kids. The next generation of the Bennett family is already growing up. I want to make sure they know the stories and understand the lessons we've learned." Marcus had recently realized he was entering the same phase of life his grandpa William was in when he wrote his letters. It was the age when it became important to pass wisdom to the next generations and ensure important lessons weren't lost. But unlike his grandfather, Marcus was determined not to wait until after death to share his important words. He had already started writing letters to nephews and other young people in the family, but this time he would deliver them personally and use them as opportunities for meaningful conversations. "Sarah, there's something I want to do," said Marcus after a long period of contemplative silence. "I want to organize a project where each young person in the family spends a day here on the grounds with me, learning about our history and the lessons we've discovered." The idea excited Sarah. "Like a family rite of passage?" "Exactly. Not just to tell stories, but to teach the practical principles of the tree approach. I want them to know how to apply patience, observation, and curiosity in their own lives." Marcus was already visualizing how it would be. Each young person would plant their own tree on the grounds, creating a personal connection to the place. They would learn the family history through their great-grandfather's letters and through the experiences of the following generations. And most importantly, they would practice emotional communication skills in a safe and loving environment. "What if we expanded this beyond our family?" suggested Sarah. Many parents would love to have a place where they could bring their teenage children for this kind of experience. The suggestion made Marcus realize there was still plenty of room for growth and innovation in the organization's programs. Even after passing on the official leadership, he could still contribute by developing new specialized programs. "Sarah, I think I've discovered what I want to do in the coming years," he said with renewed excitement. "I want to develop intergenerational programs that help grandparents, parents, and children connect through hands-on experiences here on the grounds." The idea had unlimited potential. Marcus could imagine workshops where 3 generations worked together on projects, shared stories, and learned to communicate effectively across generational differences. That night, Marcus and Sarah stayed up late, planning new projects and dreaming of future possibilities. The leadership transition, which Marcus had initially seen as an end, was revealing itself as the beginning of a new phase of contribution and growth. When they finally went to sleep, Marcus had one of the most vivid dreams he'd ever experienced with his grandpa William. In the dream, the old man was working on a new piece of woodwork, but this time, Marcus was beside him, watching and learning. "Grandpa, thank you for all the lessons," said Marcus in the dream. His grandfather stopped working and looked at his grandson with a warm smile. "Marcus, you've learned the most important lesson of all." "Which one?" "That the greatest legacy we can leave isn't the things we build, but the people we teach to build." Marcus woke the next morning with a deep sense of completeness and renewed purpose. The dream had crystallized his understanding of the true meaning of his 10-year journey. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Marcus made the right decisions throughout the story? We would love to read your opinion on this family transformation journey. Thank you so much for your company.